and welcome back to another episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm your host, Hayleigh Hayhurst. Today is National Podcast Day, and today I really wanted to talk about how podcasting has helped my business, how it's helped my clients' business, and why I'm such a big fan of podcasting. Now, of course, I'm the owner of Espresso Podcast Production, which helps entrepreneurs with their marketing of their podcast as well as their editing. So podcasting is my whole business. But beyond that, podcasting is so powerful for growing your business, for getting more clients, for growing your brand, getting more visible, and really ultimately what it does is helps you get your story out there and share your voice. And this is why I absolutely love podcasting. I was on a podcast just the other day, and I will link it in the show notes, but someone in the audience asked, where do you see podcasting taking you? And my answer, now I was not expecting this question, but my genuine answer was something like, I want to empower the voices that may not have been heard, or I want to empower people who feel such a calling to share their story, and I want to help them get that out there. Podcasting is not the easiest thing in the world to do. Of course, anyone can talk to a microphone and put it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all those streaming services. And really how I help people and what I want to help people with is actually spreading that voice and spreading that knowledge and getting that all to different people who are interested in hearing your opinion on whatever topic you're talking about. So really building that community is what I strive for in this industry and what I absolutely love to help my clients with. So I started my podcast journey back in college, my junior year of college, I believe in 2018. And I had a podcast with my friend that we just thought was going to be for fun. And it was just for fun. Like, we did not monetize it. But what we had a lot of fun doing was growing the social media and connecting with more people in this very niche industry. So we were posting on Twitter and Instagram and, DMing other people in the industry and just making connections. And it was so much fun. It was like a passion. Now, at the time, I was full-time in school, had multiple internships. So it wasn't my number one priority, but I was able to prioritize it enough to grow this podcast. And so that was super fun. And since I started in this industry and then started my business about 2.5 years ago, I've definitely seen some changes of people in the past were very controlling over their podcasts. Like, they didn't really hire services. They didn't really, like, if you started a podcast, you were basically doing it all on your own. And what I'm seeing a shift to is, and this isn't quite a shift that I encourage, but I've seen a shift in people really outsourcing a lot of their podcasts to big industries. And so they basically record and then send it off to this agency and they publish it for them and then sometimes do the marketing, whatever it may be. And I really think that we're really shifting into this sense of that personal touch when it comes to podcasting. Now, my clients outsource to me, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about sending it off to someone who you don't know to edit your show, publish it, and really that hands-off touch from it. But what I do for my clients, honestly, is I build a connection with them. And I make sure that their podcast is fully them. I make sure that I'm matching their voice in the show notes. I'm matching their tone. I'm removing those ums, but in a way that it still sounds very clean and them. I wanted to make sure it sounds just like them. And so that's really where I see the podcast industry shifting to next, I feel like a lot more people might want to have more control over their podcast. And that's where I come in. I let them have total control over their podcast, but I make it easy for them. I only take on a certain amount of clients at a time because I want to make sure that I'm able to give them all the loving care that they need and make sure that their podcast is actually what they're looking for. Each one of my clients has a different voice. Now, some of them are in the same industry because I work with entrepreneurial women, but they all have their own voice and their own way that I edit. And some of them I do video editing for, some of them it's audio only. Some of them I actually help them with their marketing. And for all of these, I need to understand them. I need to understand their why. And I really need to understand what podcasting is to them and to their business and what they're using it for. So these are all things that I go through with my clients before we even put out a first episode for them. Now, I also wanted to highlight some of my clients' success with their podcast. So I have just the most amazing clients, and I love each and every one of them. The first one I want to highlight is someone I've been working with for over a year. I launched her podcast with her, and we've been working together, I believe, for a year and a couple months. Her name is Kelsey Foremost, and she's the host of the Find Your Magic podcast. I absolutely love Kelsey's podcast. She talks about entrepreneurship and where it meets at mental health. And the conversation she's having is so incredible. But one thing I want to highlight here is she's a copywriter. So her podcast, while she does have some copywriting episodes, it's not necessarily 100% tied to her podcast. But that didn't stop her from getting a sponsorship before she even started her show. So she started her show already having a pretty healthy following. She used to be an actor and she has a following from that, but her podcast is doing really, really well on its own. And so that's my first amazing client. I love Kelsey. The next one I want to highlight is Liz Landine, host of the Outdoor Entrepreneur podcast. She is such a badass. I absolutely love her. She's actually on a 3-week camping trip with one of my other clients. I connected them to each other. One of them lives in Colorado, one of them lives in Las Vegas, and I was like, you guys should meet. And oh my God, it's just, I love connecting people. That's like my favorite thing. So the fact that they hit it off is incredible. So back to Liz, she has such a cool podcast. She's tying her love for the outdoors to her love of helping people start a podcast. And so she's had really cool conversations on there. And she actually went through my 6-month coaching program where we really set up her marketing, her podcast goals, all of that fun stuff. And really, we worked together to get her some sponsors. And it's been so much fun. She has really just grown so much since she started her show. And it just makes me so happy to watch her success. Another client I want to highlight is Betsy O'Brien. She is one of my newer clients, my second newest client, and she is the host of the Bet's Life podcast. Betsy connected with me because she was actually friends with Kelsey. And from the start, I was like, oh my gosh, me and Betsy are going to have so much fun together. And Betsy has wanted to start her podcast for about 2 years and finally made the leap to actually start it. And so we just launched her podcast, I believe 2 weeks ago, and it's doing really well. She's a blogger in Santa Barbara, and I had never worked with a blogger before. Normally I work with business coaches, but it's really fun being in the influencer space and seeing how her podcast is growing in the influencer space and how she's really using it to, open herself up to so much more income. She can get sponsorships for her podcast. She can get sponsorships for her social media. And now she can combine the two and really get sponsorships for both. And so that's super incredible to see how she is monetizing and how I've helped her along the way. And I have so many more clients, but the last one that I want to highlight is Janelle Tremblett. She is my first international client. She's in Canada, and she is the host of the Ebb and Glow podcast. And I love her podcast too. It's very lifestyle like. And she made it to maybe episode 60 before she hired me and wanted to focus more on her marketing. So I help her with her editing and, always go back and forth with some marketing ideas for her. But she wanted to really start her TikTok, start her YouTube, and grow on Instagram. And she couldn't do that with having to edit hours each week. And so I take the editing and she focuses on the marketing. And I love everything she's doing. Her Instagram is incredible. Her TikTok has been growing and she just launched her YouTube. And so these are some of my clients that are getting more clients through their podcast, growing their brands, really doing incredible things. And I would go through all my clients, but it would be a very long podcast. So I just wanted to highlight these four because they really are showing how podcasting can increase your profits, increase your visibility, and really get you out there. And I just think that's so incredible to see. I also wanted to talk about how podcasting has helped my business. So when I launched my podcast, I was kind of on the fence of I edit so many podcasts each week and I do so much podcast marketing for my clients. I was like, do I really want to take this on? This is very honest. Like, did I really want to spend another 2 to 3 hours a week doing my own marketing and my own podcast? And it took me a while to actually launch, but ultimately I was like, yeah, I will start my podcast, but with a very specific goal. My goal for this podcast was never to hit the new and noteworthy. It was never to be ranking in the top 10 podcasts. Of course, I want people to listen and I want to get in front of the right people and in the ears of the right people. But my goal was really never to get millions of downloads. The goal for this podcast is a marketing tool. I have these incredible conversations and I'm putting out these extremely valuable episodes. But ultimately, what I wanted my podcast to be is basically like a working portfolio of my work, of where people who want to come work with me can come and listen to my podcast and hear my editing skills. They can hear the way that I present myself. And as I was talking about earlier in this episode, I wanted to do that personal touch. So like I was saying, each one of my clients I have built a relationship with. There's not one of my clients that I don't know personal things about. I know a lot about my clients on and off work, like Janelle. When we connected, we were both going through a breakup and we just really talked about that in like a friendship way. And of course, she's my client, always professional, but it's just super fun to have these actual relationships. It's kind of like when you would go into the office and all stand around the water cooler and talk. That's the type of relationship I want with my clients. I don't want it to be a very formal type of work. I really want it to be personal. And so that's how podcasting has helped my business. Launching this podcast, I have had numerous connection calls of people who want to work with me. And they say, oh yeah, I listen to your podcast. I really like it. And then they work with me. And that's what I wanted from this show. So I'm living out my podcast dream, and so are all of my clients. And so I really wanted to spend the last half of this episode talking about why to start a podcast and how to start a podcast. So if you're not already convinced, podcasting is so incredible for your marketing. It's so incredible for your visibility, and it really gets you in front of the right eyes. So if you want to bring on more clients, podcasting is great for that. It's a great way because, if you're a coach and you're posting on Instagram and you're spending so much time on your stories that delete in 24 hours and putting these amazing captions on these photos that are going to just blend in with the rest of your Instagram. It's pretty frustrating. It's a lot of work. And so when you have a podcast, not only can you show off your personality, but it's kind of more long form content. I've talked about this before on other episodes, but your podcast can live forever. You're going to want to definitely title it with very SEO friendly topics, but ultimately you are going to be found for years and years and years. And I think that's the most amazing part of podcasting. It lasts longer than social media. So if you maybe are like Betsy and don't have a coaching program, but you want to make money from your podcast or you want to grow your brand, really round out your brand, a blog, a social media, a podcast, all go hand in hand and they really complete each other. You could definitely do that. And I think that podcasting, I cannot think of one industry or one person that should not have a podcast. Every voice deserves to be heard. It doesn't mean everyone has to agree with the voices, but every voice truly does deserve to be heard. And so that's why I'm saying I cannot think of anyone who shouldn't have a podcast. And it's incredible for brands. If you have a specific company that you're thinking of starting a podcast for, you can send me a DM and I can go through some ideas for you because honestly, every single podcast industry, like every single industry, I can think of a podcast for. I don't know if that's like a special talent or something, but literally try me, DM me, and I'll come up with something. And so it's super fun. I love podcasting. Like I said, it's my whole life. It's what I do day in and day out. This is my full-time job. This is how I support myself. And so the last part of this, I want to talk about how to start a podcast. Now, on my website, I have a portion under resources, and it's a podcast launch checklist where you can really see what you need to do to start a podcast. You can also send me a DM, but podcasting can be pretty low cost to start. I really recommend recording on Zoom, editing on something like Descript or Adobe Audition, and getting a good microphone. And then also setting up a Canva account so you can really start on your marketing. Canva is such an amazing tool. That's where I create everything for my Instagram. I also really recommend having a clear vision. Like all of my clients, before I work with them, I need to understand their vision. For my podcast, before I launched, and what took me so long to launch was understanding my vision. So until the end, I was just doing this for September. I was calling it Start Your Podcast September, but I've had a lot of people reach out to me and I want to extend this offer to the end of the year. So until December, the end of December, I am knocking $200 off my podcast launch program where I help you launch your podcast. I tell you exactly what you need to do. And then we work together to get that all complete. And then I post it for you and it's super easy for you. All you basically have to do is send me the things that I need to actually get your podcast up and running. And then you have a fully functioning podcast, very professionally set up. Everything will sound incredible. That's another part of podcasting. It needs to sound professional. If you're wanting to make money off of it, you need to put money into it to make it perfect. And when I say perfect, it doesn't all need to be incredible right when you start, Like I just launched my new podcast art and I love it. I love my new podcast art. I liked my old one, but this one feels a lot more me and a lot more my personality. And so things like that can always change, but you always want to start off professionally, and that's what I help my clients do. So if you're interested in that, you can contact me on Instagram, Espresso Podcast Production, or you can go on my website and fill out the form and just contact me through there and I will be in touch with you. So I hope that this episode is really enlightening and I love podcasts, so I had to celebrate International Podcast Day with a special episode. So thank you so much for listening. Let me know if you have any questions because I'm always here to help. All right, I'll talk to you in next week's episode. Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.